We have people that can come to our country from Manus or Nauru, people that have been charged with child sex offences, people that have been charged or allegations around serious offences, including murder.
And how many of those are on Nauru and Manus?
Well, I would suggest to you that Australians don't want those people to come to Australia.
How many of them are on Nauru and Manus? People charged with serious offences like child sex offences?
We'll release that detail if it's appropriate to do so.
Well, you're the relevant minister. I'm asking you tonight.
Hello, I'm Paul Berry. Welcome to Media Watch. And stand by for another political firestorm over boats, borders and the truth. Or as 10 News put it...
Make no mistake, the upcoming federal election will be fought on asylum seekers and it will be brutal.
Depending on your politics, giving asylum seekers faster access to mainland medical treatment is either a humanitarian triumph or a disaster for our strong border protection policy. But as government MPs blitzed the airwaves, there was no doubting their line of attack.
This is going to be able to get spivs and rapists and murderers onto our shores.
But remarkably, Sky's Kieran Gilbert was going to have none of that from the Deputy PM.
You're saying rapists and murderers will be allowed here. They won't be allowed here because the bill says serious crimes would preclude that. That's wrong what you said. You admit that?
What Labor says and what Labor...
What the bill says. I'm sorry, you've got to be factual when you make the case. Do you concede that you were wrong in saying that about...
No, I don't, because...
Have you not read the bill?
Of course I've read the bill.
Well, you are wrong.
And when McCormack held his ground, Gilbert tackled him again.
But isn't it better to stay off the hyperbole, though, in terms of saying rapists and pedophiles? And I mean, people can see through that.
Well, unfortunately, that's what we're going to get in the future, and unfortunately,
that's not true, though, Michael McCormack, that rapists and murderers would come here.
Now, you'd think that might be the end of it, but not at all. Sky then repeated parts of the interview with this strapline, highlighting the Deputy PM's false claims. It's hard to imagine the ABC having the courage to do that, especially on such a politically sensitive subject. But American networks are fact-checking aggressively to deal with Trump, and good on Sky for doing it here. Because, as the Herald's David Crowe explained, facts matter in the refugee debate. And one key fact is this.
The bill applies a character test that allows the immigration minister to reject a transfer for someone with a substantial criminal record, including for any crime with a prison term of 1 year or more. For all the government's talk of murderers entering the country, there is a clear power to stop them.
But it's not just facts that matter here. It's also the spin the media bring to the story. The Fairfax papers greeted the passing of the medical evacuation bill as a historic government defeat. The Guardian saw it, predictably, as a great humanitarian victory. But for the rest of the mainstream media, the story was all about border protection, with the West Australian asking on its front page...
How many illegal boats will arrive before the election?
Typically, News Corp went furthest in pushing the government line, with this front page in the Australian.
Blame Shorten for boats.
ALP joins Phelps Greens to soften border regime.
And the Daily Telegraph also pulled no punches with this shocking front-page screamer.
Gren Reapers.
Which, we assume, is accusing the independent MPs who sponsored the Medevac bill of sending future asylum seekers to their deaths. By Friday, the Telegraph had run no less than 23 articles blasting the policy and its supporters. The Australian, meanwhile, had churned out 14 stories and editorials, which were just as one-sided. Over on Sky After Dark, almost all the commentators and guests were also in furious agreement that the Labor-backed changes were to be condemned. And just like the telly, Peter Credlin took aim.
And then there's the so-called independents in what were Liberal seats. Cathy McGowan, Rebecca Sharkey and Kerryn Phelps. Labor mutton dressed up as Liberal lamb.
On daytime Sky, even the normally impeccable David Spears also stepped into the fray with an unsourced claim.
Australia's intelligence agencies, so a number of them, are of the view now that the passage of this Medevac bill through the Parliament, through the House and the Senate, has, quote, stirred the beast being the people smuggling trade.
And this was then dramatically tweeted by Sky and parroted back by government MPs.
I did notice just before coming in now on social media, Patricia, that, to quote David Spears, that the beast has stirred.
So, has anyone seen the stirring beast? Taking an old-fashioned journalistic approach, the Australian's Indonesia correspondent went to gather her own intelligence and reached a very different conclusion.
notwithstanding intelligence agency warnings that the beast is stirring in Indonesia and the government's preemptive decision to reopen the Christmas Island detention centre. No one the Australians spoke to yesterday believed the law would prompt a fresh flood of asylum vessels.
Remarkably, that story did not make the front page, getting pushed back to page 4, where it failed to make top billing. What a surprise! Since then, 9 News and Fairfax have also had reporters in Indonesia and Pakistan testing the waters.
There are about 30 fishermen ready to go. He tells me go out and back, out and back.
They found fishermen ready to put to sea and one people smuggler talking of plots to test a shortened government. Meanwhile, refugees in Indonesia have told both Fairfax and 9 they won't get on boats as long as they're being turned back. Yet that, strangely enough, did not make the lead, even in The Age and Sydney Morning Herald. No doubt we'll see a lot more on this topic as the election approaches. And rest assured, some sections of the media will be happy to help run a scare campaign. But now, to entertainment, Australia's biggest TV blockbuster and the ugly reality behind it.
Television's biggest social experiment.
I think I've struck gold.
I just feel like I'm the luckiest girl in the world.
Will deliver instant true love.
Fantastic.
At first sight.
For the uninitiated, Married at First Sight, or MAFS, involves complete strangers, matched by experts, meeting at the altar and tying the knot. And it is a massive hit for 9, which runs it 4 nights a week in prime time. But with content like this, it's no surprise.
What are you feeling right now?
I feel like horny.
I'm still of two minds to open up and tell Lauren, you know, that I'm still a virgin.
I can talk the talk, and if I'm bored with you, you're like a wet wipe, and I'll push you to the side.
9 also pumps out these characters 4 mornings a week on Today and Today Extra for live interviews about things like, well, consummating the marriage.
Watching that last night, I was like, oh, a little bit of me died inside. But in the experiment, like, you've got to be honest about every move you make.
9 also has a bunch of its top personalities and experienced journalists flogging this stuff. And not just its new breakfast duo, Georgie Gardner and Deb Knight. Jane Azzopardi and Alison Langdon, Ben Fordham and others are all part of the promotion's juggernaut. And that's because selling true love is a massive money spinner. So, with 5 seasons already aired, how is 9's record on matchmaking? Absolutely terrible. Out of 35 couples matched over 5 seasons, as far as we can tell, only 1 couple from 2016 is still together. And even they don't like how the show's now being made.
It's fueled by drama and not people looking for relationships. It's a quick way for people to get famous. In my opinion, it's lost the genuineness.
Not sure I'd want to do it in its current format.
So, what is the current format? Brasher than ever.
The scandals that happened last year. How are you going to top that?
Well, we will top it. Boundaries will be crossed. There will be temptation. The personalities, frankly, get bigger and bigger.
And so do the headlines. Day after day they come about the latest drama, twist or scandal, all hoping to piggyback on MAFS' success. But there have also been stories about its failure to look after contestants. Dean Wells, the villain of last year's series, recently took to YouTube to complain.
There's networks pulling strings. There's higher-up people making millions and millions of dollars off these poor sods on these TV shows that are silly and naive enough to think that they're signing up for love.
Despite being one of the stars and making a fortune for the show's producers, Dean now has little good to say about it. And he told Me to Watch that Married at First Sight ruined his business.
I was the most hated man in Australia. There was no way I could turn up to corporate meetings. I had to shut it down for 8 months or so. It cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. 9 don't support you. They don't give a about you as a human being. They drop you like a rock at the end of it.
After his dramatic flirtation with another wife ended in tears, Dean says he told executive producer Tara McWilliams that he wanted to leave, but he claims he was met with threats.
They forced me to stay. They said, we'll make you look bad if you don't stay.
Dean's wife on MAFS, Tracy Jewell, has also had a rough ride with the constant media coverage and cyber abuse.
When you're relentlessly bullied online every day, and you wake up and there's a new article about you online that you know nothing about, and there's viral content, it's overwhelming.
Tracy ended up in a mental health clinic last year after overdosing and claims it was a direct consequence of being on MAFS.
I've never had mental health problems, other than a bit of postnatal depression, in my life. Now I struggle with anxiety every day. I see a psychologist every week. I'm better than I was, but I'm not the person I was before the show.
Another MAFS star, Andrew Jones, says he's still recovering from being on the show in 2017. Also cast as a villain, he told Media Watch he too was threatened when he asked to leave mid-production.
I was emotionally unwell at that point, melting down actually, and not getting any support from them. The conversation started calmly, but I was told by Tara in a raised voice, "It will look bad for you if you leave now."
The show has also had a negative impact on other cast members, like Davina Rankin and Sean Thompson. And they've spoken out in defiance of a clause in their contracts with the show's producer, Endemol, which bans them from criticising, disparaging or denigrating the programme or anyone associated with it publicly, and prevents them from doing any media work for up to 2 years without Nine's approval. And it's not just contestants speaking up about the harm the show can do. 2 years ago, prominent psychologist Michael Carr-Gregg slammed the programme as, quote, the psychological sewer of Australian television, and warned,
"We are playing with people's lives. I don't think this is good entertainment. I know it rates its socks off, but so did the Colosseum in Rome because people liked watching lions rip Christians apart."
Carr-Gregg also took aim at the 3 experts Nine was using on the show, saying they should hang their heads in shame. And he's not alone. The Australian Psychological Society told Media Watch it also had a number of concerns, that participants and relationship advisors are often cast in a negative light, and the narrative is highly manipulated. Endemol Shine, which produces the show, says the claim of threatening behaviour by the executive producer against cast members is
simply not true.
It also rejects the charge of not caring for its desperate lovers.
There is a dedicated show psychologist and support team available to every participant throughout the entire production, broadcast and beyond.
Meanwhile, amid all this flack, how is MAFS doing for Nine? According to the Weekend Australian, unbelievably well.
The impact of this program on Nine cannot be overstated. Last year, Nine won the share of advertising dollars for the first time in more than a decade.
And according to Alan Kohler, it essentially allowed Nine to take over Fairfax last year.
MAFS almost single-handedly returned Nine to top spot in the ratings, thereby producing a 50% lift in Nine's share price, almost overnight.
This year, it's driving all before it, topping the ratings every night this month and hauling in millions of dollars for the network. Which is why for Nine, it is true love, even if the promises for its newly married couples are nothing but fairy dust. Finally, let's check in with Melbourne's gritty underworld, where violence is never far away.
Some breaking news now, and these pictures are just in. They show a prisoner said to be former drug kingpin Tony Mockbell being treated after being stabbed at Melbourne's Barwon prison.
Tony Mockbell is one of Australia's most notorious criminals, and with his crimes came fame via Nine's Underbelly and spin-off Fat Tony & Co. So, when he was stabbed in jail last Monday and left in a critical condition, it was big news.
Mockbell had been stabbed 3 times and paramedics treated the 53-year-old in an exercise yard. He was loaded into an ambulance and driven to a helicopter waiting nearby.
But one day before the stabbing, readers of the Sunday Herald Sun were treated to a very different story about Mockbell.
Exclusive.
Tony the Enforcer.
Drug lord Tony Mockbell is now a feared prison bigwig.
The front page splash was a great tabloid yarn because it sensationally claimed that Mockbell had
recently intervened in a prison standover scheme, disrupting an extortion racket run by a group of Pacific Island inmates.
And it included this quote from an unnamed legal source saying Big Tony was still flexing his muscle behind bars.
He's lost none of his power since being locked up. All he has to do is say the word, and people listen.
24 hours after the paper hit the streets, Mockbell was stabbed 3 times, the attack so vicious he was left with bleeding on the brain. So, did the story trigger the stabbing? Good question, and one the ABC was flagging.
So one line of speculation is whether or not people may have read that and been irked by this kind of idea that Mockbell's some kind of enforcer.
And that idea was given credence by the journalists who chronicled Melbourne's gangland wars in the original Underbelly book series.
It is interesting chronology of events that on one day there's a story in the paper, in the popular paper, the paper that's read widely throughout Victoria, including in prisons and probably brought in by prison staff, that it's read one day and then this happens the next. You can draw your own conclusions.
And co-author John Sylvester was certainly drawing his, explaining to A Current Affair why the front page story could be to blame.
And the reason why it would prompt an attack is the prisons are filled with egotistical psychopaths. And a suggestion that Tony Mockbell or anybody else was running the system would get other people's noses out of joint.
So, does the paper accept it's responsible? Sunday Herald Sun editor Nick Papp says no. Second question, would they do anything differently in future?
No. We've been reporting on the underworld for decades. We tell Victorians what is happening in this state without fear or favour.
Fair enough, although you might have expected some pause for thought. Reporting has real consequences, especially in the underbelly of Melbourne. And that's all from us tonight. You can read more about our stories on the website, where you can see a full statement from Endemol and Nine. And don't forget, Media Bites on your favourite social media platform every Thursday. But for now, until next week, goodbye.